I always hated that red dress. Not because it wasn't beautiful, it was, but because it made Lisa different. When she wore it, she seemed untouchable, like she was wielding power she didn't usually have. Her movements became sharper, her smiles more calculated, and her gaze, it wasn't just alluring. It was hunting. That Friday night, the dress reappeared. I watched her from the kitchen as she adjusted the straps in front of the hallway mirror. She pretended not to notice me, but her fingers lingering on her collarbone told a different story. Lisa was rehearsing, setting the stage for someone else. Late dinner for a Friday? I asked casually, sipping from a mug of lukewarm coffee I didn't really want. My hands just needed something to do. It's not that late, she replied with a dismissive shrug, avoiding eye contact. I'll be back by 10. That was her tell, too much lightness in her tone, a forced casualness that made my stomach churn. She was lying, and she thought she was good at it. Maybe she used to be. I nodded, swallowing my irritation. Drive safe. Her eyes flickered with surprise for just a second, probably expecting me to push further, but she quickly masked it with a tight smile. Grabbing her clutch, she disappeared out the door, her heels clicking against the tile like gunfire. As soon as her car pulled out of the driveway, I moved. This wasn't impulse, it was strategy. For weeks, I'd noticed small cracks in our perfect life. Late nights, vague excuses, and unexplained bank charges started to form a puzzle I didn't want to finish. But denial only works for so long. Now, I needed proof. Grabbing my phone, I opened the tracking app I'd secretly installed on her car. Yeah, I know. It's the kind of thing that makes people call you paranoid. But sometimes you need to light a match to confirm the smell of gasoline. The blinking blue dot moved steadily across the map, not toward her office like she'd claimed. No, it veered across town, heading in the opposite direction. My jaw tightened as the destination became clear. A restaurant downtown, the kind of place where business dinners weren't exactly platonic. I threw on a jacket and grabbed my keys. Following her wasn't part of the original plan, but it was too perfect an opportunity. Lisa thought she had me wrapped around her finger, that I was the clueless husband she could outmaneuver with charm and vague promises. She was wrong. I parked a block away, keeping my distance as she stepped out of her car. The man waiting for her wasn't a colleague. His tailored suit, polished shoes, and confident demeanor made that obvious. He opened the door for her, his hand brushing the small of her back in a way that made my blood boil. My fists clenched around the steering wheel, but I stayed put. Charging in would be too predictable, and Lisa had always been good at twisting things to her advantage. I needed more than a confrontation. I needed a plan. For the next half hour, I sat in my car, watching through the restaurant window as they leaned in close, laughing and sharing whispered words. The intimacy between them was undeniable. And that's when it hit me. Lisa thought she was playing chess. She didn't realize I'd already put her in checkmate. I drove home in silence. The image of them together burned into my mind. Every breath felt like fire, but I forced myself to stay calm. Lisa had always been 3 steps ahead in every argument, every lie. She was a master of deflection, using guilt and logic as weapons. But this time, I had the truth, and I was going to make sure she couldn't squirm away from it. By the time I pulled into the driveway, the outline of my plan was clear. It wasn't kind, but kindness wasn't the point anymore. She deserved what was coming. Grabbing my phone, I scrolled through my contacts until I found the name I hadn't called in months. Melissa Turner. She was the wife of the man Lisa had just met for dinner. I knew about her from my earlier digging, social media posts, mutual friends, and a tagged photo or two. My thumb hovered over the call button. For a second, I hesitated. Then I pressed it. Hello? Melissa's voice was cheerful, almost too bright, like she was having the best day of her life. Hi, Melissa. This is Jake Mitchell. I know this is out of the blue, but I think we need to talk. There was a pause. Jake Mitchell? Lisa's husband? Yes, I replied, keeping my tone even. It's about your husband. I think he's been spending time with my wife. The line went quiet. For a moment, I thought she'd hung up, but then I heard her inhale sharply. What are you saying? She whispered. I saw them tonight, I said, my voice steady but cold. I think it's time we confronted them together. Melissa's silence on the other end of the line felt heavier than anything I could have imagined. I almost expected her to scream or hang up. Instead, she finally exhaled, her breath shaky but controlled. "You're sure about this?" she asked, her voice low, like she didn't want the walls around her to hear. "I saw them tonight," I repeated. "At Michelson's downtown. Lisa in her red dress, your husband in a suit. They weren't discussing spreadsheets." "Oh, God." Her voice cracked, and I could practically feel her chest tightening. She was in freefall, just like I'd been when I first suspected. "Why? Why are you telling me this?" "Because I think we can handle it better together," I replied, choosing my words carefully. "I don't want drama. I want the truth out in the open. No room for excuses." Her tone shifted. The hesitation melted away, replaced by a sharpness I hadn't expected. "You're right. No excuses. What do you have in mind?" "We're hosting a party tomorrow, something small, just a few friends and neighbors. Bring him. He won't suspect a thing, and neither will Lisa. We'll confront them when they're caught off guard." Melissa was quiet again, but this time, I could tell she wasn't shocked. She was calculating. "He'll come," she said finally. "He thinks I don't see anything. He'll come." "Good," I said, my grip tightening on the phone. "Tomorrow, we'll end this." When we hung up, I sat in the darkened living room, the silence thick and suffocating. The house that once felt warm now loomed like a stranger's. The smell of Lisa's perfume lingered faintly in the air, a sickening reminder of the life I thought we'd built together. My hands trembled, but it wasn't from sadness. It was from the storm brewing inside me, one I'd been holding back for far too long. She came home just after 10, as promised. Her heels clicked on the tile, the sound of a woman walking into a life she thought she still controlled. I stayed seated, staring into the glass of whiskey in my hand, as if it held all the answers I was searching for. "Sorry I'm late," Lisa said breezily, setting her clutch on the counter. The meeting dragged on forever. I didn't look at her. "It's fine." She paused, clearly waiting for me to ask more. When I didn't, she continued, her voice faltering just slightly. "You'll have to tell me about your day tomorrow. I'm exhausted. Heading to bed. Love you." "Love you too," I said, my tone so flat it was almost a dare. She hesitated for just a second, then disappeared down the hallway. I didn't follow. Instead, I sat there until the whiskey burned in my stomach and the fury in my chest finally quieted into a cold, steely resolve. The next day, the sun rose on a picture-perfect morning, mocking me with its cheerfulness. The kind of day where everything looks like it belongs on the front of a postcard. Green lawns, blue skies, and neighbors waving hello as they walked their dogs. Lisa was in her element. She breezed through the preparations for the party with the kind of confidence that made me wonder how long she'd been perfecting this charade. Watching her laugh, arrange flowers, and flit between tasks like nothing had happened was almost unbearable. How could someone hide so much behind a smile? "I'll handle the drinks," she said, flashing me a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Can you take care of the grill?" "Sure," I said, keeping my tone neutral. The less I said, the better. By the time Melissa and Greg arrived, the yard was buzzing with guests. The air hummed with laughter, the clink of glasses, and the smell of burgers sizzling on the grill. It all felt surreal, like a dream you know is about to turn into a nightmare. Melissa walked in first, her head held high. She wore a sleek black dress that looked like armor, her sharp eyes scanning the crowd until they landed on Lisa. Greg trailed behind her, wearing his usual smug grin. When he saw Lisa, his expression didn't even flicker. If anything, it deepened, like he was proud of what they were hiding. "Greg, Melissa, so good to see you," Lisa chirped, throwing her arms around Melissa like they were old friends. The audacity made my stomach churn. Melissa hugged her back stiffly, her lips pressed into a tight line. "It's been a while," she said, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. Greg extended a hand toward me, as if this were just another friendly neighborhood barbecue. I shook it, gripping harder than necessary. His grin didn't waver, but I caught the slightest twitch in his jaw. Lisa was too busy playing hostess to notice the tension. "Jake, can you grab them some drinks while I mingle?" Of course, I said, watching her saunter off. She moved with the kind of confidence that only comes from believing you're untouchable. That was about to change. Melissa leaned in slightly once Lisa was out of earshot. She doesn't suspect a thing, she murmured, her tone low but charged with energy. Neither does Greg, I replied, my eyes fixed on him as he scanned the party like he owned the place. Let's keep it that way. For the next hour, we played the game. Small talk, polite smiles, laughter that felt hollow in my chest. Melissa and I exchanged quick glances, silently coordinating our moves. Lisa and Greg were too absorbed in their performance to notice the storm building around them. Then, just as I'd hoped, Lisa and Greg drifted toward the back corner of the yard. Their heads leaned close, their laughter carrying softly on the breeze. It was the moment we'd been waiting for. Melissa's gaze locked with mine. Without a word, we moved. The air was electric as Melissa and I approached the corner of the yard where Lisa and Greg were standing. Their laughter floated on the breeze, light and carefree, as if they were the only two people in the world. For them, it was just another stolen moment in their private fantasy. For us, it was the prelude to their downfall. Lisa was the first to notice us. Her head snapped up, her eyes meeting mine, and for the briefest moment, I saw something unfamiliar flicker across her face, fear. She quickly masked it with her usual composed smile, but I wasn't fooled. Jake, she said, her voice forcefully cheerful. Melissa, what are you two doing back here? The party's in full swing. I didn't respond right away. Instead, I let the silence stretch, my gaze boring into hers. Greg shifted uncomfortably, his hand slipping from the edge of the table where it had rested dangerously close to Lisa's. Melissa broke the tension first. I think you know why we're here, she said, her tone cutting through the air like a blade. Greg's confident smirk faltered. He glanced at Lisa, who was suddenly very interested in the glass of wine in her hand. I don't know what you're talking about, Lisa said, her voice a little too high-pitched, a little too defensive. No? I asked, crossing my arms. Maybe I should spell it out for you. Last night, Michelson's, 8:15. Red dress. Remember now? Her cheeks flushed, but she didn't answer. Instead, she turned to Greg, her eyes wide with silent pleading. Melissa didn't give him a chance to respond. Greg, she said, her voice trembling with restrained fury. Did you think I wouldn't find out? Did you think you could sneak around with Lisa, and I'd just go on smiling like a fool? Greg raised his hands as if to ward off the verbal blows. Melissa, come on. You're blowing this out of proportion. Lisa and I were just... Don't you dare finish that sentence, Melissa snapped, stepping forward. I'm not stupid, Greg. Neither is Jake. We've been watching you two for weeks. Lisa's composure was unraveling. She gripped the edge of the table, her knuckles white, as her eyes darted between me and Melissa. This isn't the place for this, she hissed, her voice low but shaking. Can we at least go somewhere private? Oh, now you care about privacy? I asked, my voice cold and sharp. Funny, that didn't seem to matter when you were sneaking around behind my back. The murmur of the crowd began to grow as guests noticed the confrontation unfolding. Whispers spread like wildfire, and heads turned in our direction. Lisa glanced around nervously, her mask of confidence slipping further with every passing second. Greg tried to regain control, his tone suddenly firm. Look, this isn't the time or place for accusations. You're embarrassing yourselves. Embarrassing ourselves? Melissa's voice was loud enough to cut through the whispers, drawing even more attention. I'm not the one sneaking around like some cliché soap opera character. If anyone should be embarrassed, it's you. Lisa's face turned ashen, and for a moment, she looked like she might break down. Then, with a deep breath, she straightened her spine and turned to me. Jake, she said, her voice trembling but determined. This isn't what it looks like. Don't, I interrupted, holding up a hand. Don't even try. You can't twist your way out of this one, Lisa. I know everything. The late nights, the texts, the dinner reservations. Hell, I even know about the hotel. Her jaw dropped. You've been spying on me? Call it what you want, I shot back. But don't you dare try to make me the bad guy here. You're the one who decided our marriage wasn't enough. Greg stepped in, his tone condescending. Jake, listen. Relationships are complicated. You don't have to make this harder than it already is. I turned to him, my voice low and venomous. You don't get to lecture me about relationships. You're a joke, Greg. And the only thing complicated about this is how you thought you could get away with it. The crowd was fully focused on us now. Lisa and Greg were trapped, their faces pale under the weight of dozens of judging eyes. Melissa, emboldened by the public scrutiny, stepped closer to Greg, her voice steady and cold. We're done. Pack your things and get out of my house. Tonight. Greg sputtered, his earlier confidence completely gone. Melissa, wait. No, she said, cutting him off. You don't get to wait. You don't get another chance. You've been lying to me, to Jake, to everyone here. You're pathetic. I turned to Lisa, who looked like she wanted to sink into the ground. We're finished, I said simply. Whatever this is, whatever you thought you were getting out of it, it's over. Her lips trembled, but she didn't respond. Instead, she glanced at Greg, who was now standing frozen, his face a mask of disbelief. The murmurs of the crowd grew louder, and I realized it was time to end this. Thanks for coming, everyone, I said, raising my voice. I think it's safe to say the party's over. As the guests slowly dispersed, their whispered judgments following Lisa and Greg like shadows, I turned and walked away. Behind me, Melissa stood tall, her arms crossed, as Greg tried in vain to plead his case. Lisa didn't even try. For the first time in weeks, I felt the storm inside me begin to calm. The truth was out. The lies were done. But I knew this wasn't the end. Not yet. The aftermath of the party was like stepping into a vacuum. The noise, the murmurs, the judging eyes. All of it vanished, leaving nothing but silence and the weight of what had just unfolded. I stood in the kitchen, gripping the counter, my knuckles white against the granite. Lisa hadn't followed me inside, and I didn't want her to. I needed space. I needed air. But she came in anyway. Jake, she said softly, her voice raw and shaky. Can we talk? I didn't look at her. What's there to talk about, Lisa? You made your choice. She stepped closer, and I felt the heat of her presence before I heard the soft click of her heels on the tile. I didn't choose this, she said, her voice breaking. It wasn't supposed to happen like this. That made me laugh. A sharp, bitter sound that filled the room like shards of glass. Oh, really? How exactly was it supposed to happen, Lisa? Were we all going to sit down over coffee and chat about how you've been sneaking around with Greg? Please, enlighten me. Her silence spoke volumes. I turned to face her, and for the first time, I saw her as she really was. Not the woman I'd married, not the partner I'd built my life with, but a stranger. Her makeup was smudged, her carefully curated mask cracking under the weight of the truth. She looked small, vulnerable, but I refused to let her manipulate me with those wide, tear-filled eyes. You don't understand, she whispered, and I wanted to scream. No, Lisa, you don't understand, I snapped, my voice rising. You don't understand what it's like to trust someone completely, to build a life with them, only to find out they've been lying to you every step of the way. I was lonely, she said, her voice trembling. You were always so busy, so focused on everything else. I needed to feel wanted. Wanted? I repeated, my tone dripping with disbelief. So your solution was to destroy everything we built? To crawl into bed with someone like Greg? It wasn't like that, she said quickly, but I cut her off. Then what was it like, Lisa? Because from where I'm standing, it looks pretty damn clear. She didn't answer. Instead, she collapsed into a chair, burying her face in her hands. For a moment, I felt a pang of pity, but it was fleeting. Whatever pain she felt now was nothing compared to what she put me through. I didn't want to hurt you, she said after a long silence, her voice muffled. I swear, Jake, I didn't. Well, congratulations, I said coldly. You failed. By the time Melissa called, I was pacing the living room, the tension in my chest making it impossible to sit still. Her voice was calmer now, more composed than I'd expected. Greg's gone, she said, as if that was supposed to make me feel better. Gone where? I asked, my tone sharper than I intended. Back to his brother's place, apparently, she replied. He tried to talk his way out of it, but I told him it was over. He's furious, Jake. He's saying things that worry me. What kind of things? I stopped pacing, my grip tightening around the phone. Threats. That you ruined his life. That he's going to make you pay. I don't think he's thinking straight. I sighed, pinching the bridge of my nose. Of course Greg couldn't just let it go. Men like him didn't know how to take responsibility for their actions. If he comes near you, call the police. Immediately. What about you? Melissa asked, her voice softer now. What are you going to do? I hesitated. The truth was, I didn't know. Part of me wanted to confront Greg, to end this mess once and for all. But the other part of me, the part that was exhausted from weeks of lies and emotional turmoil, just wanted to disappear, to let the pieces of my shattered life fall where they may. I'll figure it out, I said finally. But you don't need to worry about me. That's the thing, Jake, she said, her tone firm. I do worry about you. You're in this as much as I am. Her words hung in the air long after we ended the call. Melissa was right. This wasn't just about Lisa or Greg anymore. It was about all of us. The lives they'd tangled up in their web of lies, the collateral damage left in their wake. Later that night, as I sat alone in the darkened living room, Lisa came in again. She didn't say anything at first, just stood there, her shadow stretching long across the floor. Finally, she spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. Are you really going to leave? I looked up at her, the weight of her question pressing down on me like a physical force. What do you think, Lisa? Her shoulders sagged, and for the first time, she looked defeated. I don't know. I don't know anything anymore. Join the club, I muttered, standing up. I can't do this anymore, Lisa. I can't keep pretending that everything's fine when it's not. Tears welled up in her eyes, but I didn't care. I was past caring. Jake, please, she whispered. We can fix this. We can try. You had a chance to try, I said, my voice hollow, and you threw it away. She didn't follow me as I walked past her, out of the room and out of the life we'd built together. For the first time in years, I felt like I could finally breathe. But it wasn't relief. It was emptiness. The house felt lifeless after that night, an empty shell where echoes of laughter and love used to linger. I'd spent most of the day avoiding Lisa, packing a few essentials into a suitcase and waiting for my lawyer's office to call back. My decision was made. I wasn't staying in this house a moment longer than necessary. Lisa tried to speak to me a few times, her voice cracking with desperation, but I couldn't do it. Not after everything I'd seen, everything I'd heard. Every glance at her reminded me of how easily she had lied, how smoothly she had hidden her betrayal. It was unbearable. By mid-afternoon, I was ready to leave. I stood in the living room, staring at the walls, the photos, the memories I thought were real. My suitcase sat by the door, but my feet were rooted to the spot. It felt like leaving would erase every good moment we'd ever had. But staying meant living in the ruins of something I couldn't repair. Lisa appeared in the doorway, her face pale and drawn. She looked exhausted, like she hadn't slept at all. Are you really going through with this? She asked, her voice trembling. Yes. I didn't turn to face her. I am. Her breath hitched, but she didn't cry. Not this time. Jake, Stop. I turned to her, my expression cold. Whatever you're about to say, don't. I've heard enough. But, no, Lisa. You don't get to plead your case anymore. This isn't a trial, and I'm not the jury. This is over. She fell silent, her shoulders slumping as she leaned against the doorway. Where will you go? She asked quietly. I don't know yet, I admitted. Anywhere but here. Her lips pressed into a thin line, and for a moment, she looked like she wanted to argue. But she didn't. Instead, she nodded and stepped aside, giving me a clear path to the door. I drove aimlessly for a while, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. The radio played softly in the background, but I barely heard it over the noise in my head. I replayed every argument, every lie, every moment of doubt. It was like a movie I couldn't stop watching, no matter how badly I wanted to. Eventually, I pulled into the parking lot of a motel just outside of town. It wasn't much, faded paint, flickering neon sign, but it was enough. I checked in, hauled my suitcase up to the second floor, and sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the peeling wallpaper. The silence was oppressive, but it was better than the alternative. My phone buzzed on the nightstand. I ignored it at first, assuming it was Lisa. But when it buzzed again, I picked it up and saw Melissa's name on the screen. Jake? Her voice was tense, edged with something I couldn't quite place. Fear, maybe. I just got another call from Greg. What did he say? I asked, already bracing myself for the worst. He's unhinged, she said, her voice shaking. He told me he's going to make things right. I don't even know what that means, but it didn't sound good. I closed my eyes, taking a deep breath. Greg wasn't just angry. He was spiraling. And men like Greg didn't spiral quietly. Did you call the police? I tried, she said bitterly. They told me to call back if he shows up or makes a direct threat. Apparently, vague promises of revenge aren't enough to warrant action. Of course not. The system wasn't built to prevent chaos, only to clean up the mess after it happened. Stay somewhere safe tonight, I told her. A friend's house, a hotel, anywhere but home. What about you? She asked, her tone softer now. Are you safe? I hesitated, my mind racing. Was I safe? Probably not. But that didn't matter. What mattered was stopping Greg before he could hurt anyone else. I'll be fine, I said. Don't worry about me. Jake, she said, her voice breaking slightly. This isn't just your fight. I know, I replied, but I'll handle it. Later that night, as I sat in the dim motel room, the weight of everything began to settle over me. The lies, the betrayal, the confrontation. It all felt like a surreal nightmare. But the worst part wasn't over. Greg was still out there, a storm brewing just beyond the horizon. I stared at my phone, debating whether to call Melissa back. She was right. We were in this together, whether we liked it or not. But I didn't want to drag her deeper into this mess. She'd already suffered enough. The sound of my phone buzzing jolted me out of my thoughts. This time, it wasn't Melissa or Lisa. It was an unknown number. I hesitated for a moment, then answered. Jake, a familiar voice rasped. Greg, we need to talk. There's nothing to talk about, Greg, I said, my voice steady despite the adrenaline surging through me. Oh, I think there is, he said, his tone dripping with menace. You think you can just ruin my life and walk away? You're not getting off that easy. I didn't ruin your life, Greg. You did that all on your own. He laughed, a hollow, bitter sound. You think you're better than me? That you're some kind of hero? Newsflash, Jake. You're just as much a part of this mess as I am. I didn't respond. There was no reasoning with him, no point in trying to argue. He wasn't looking for a conversation. He was looking for a fight. I'll see you soon, Jake, he said, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. Real soon. The line went dead, and I sat there, the phone still pressed to my ear, as the weight of his words settled over me. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The next morning, I woke up in the motel room, the pale light of dawn creeping through the thin curtains. I hadn't slept much, if at all. Greg's voice still echoed in my head, his threats like a dark cloud that refused to lift. Every muscle in my body was tense, coiled like a spring waiting to snap. My phone buzzed on the nightstand. For a moment, I thought it was Greg again. But when I picked it up, I saw Melissa's name. Jake, she said as soon as I answered, her voice shaky. He's here. I shot up, my heart pounding. Where are you? Are you safe? I'm at a friend's house, but Greg showed up at my place last night. My neighbor called to tell me he saw him banging on the door, yelling my name. When he didn't get a response, he left, but not before smashing my porch light and kicking over a planter. Did you call the police? I asked, already knowing the answer. Yes, she said, frustration lacing her voice. But they said they couldn't do much unless he came back. They filed a report, but that's it. Typical. Greg was escalating, and no one was taking it seriously. I paced the room, trying to think. He wasn't going to stop until he got what he wanted, or until someone stopped him. I'm coming over, I said firmly. No, Melissa protested. You don't need to get involved. This isn't your fight. It is now, I replied. We're in this together, remember? Besides, Greg doesn't just want to hurt you. He's coming after me, too. I'd rather face him on my terms than wait for him to make the first move. Melissa hesitated, then sighed. Be careful, Jake. Please. By the time I reached Melissa's neighborhood, my resolve had hardened. I parked a few houses down from her friend's place, not wanting to draw attention. The house was small but well kept, with flowers lining the walkway and a wind chime that tinkled softly in the breeze. Melissa opened the door before I even knocked. She looked tired, her eyes rimmed with dark circles, but there was a fire in her expression. Thanks for coming, she said quietly, stepping aside to let me in. Any sign of him this morning? I asked, glancing around the cozy living room. She shook her head. No, but I can't shake the feeling he's watching. He's unpredictable, Jake. I don't know what he's capable of anymore. That made two of us. I sat down on the couch, rubbing my temples as I tried to form a plan. Confronting Greg wasn't going to be easy. He was angry, volatile, and clearly willing to cross lines. But letting him continue unchecked wasn't an option. What do you want to do? Melissa asked, her voice hesitant. I want to end this, I said, my tone firm. Greg thrives on control. He thinks he can intimidate us into submission, but we're not going to give him that power. Melissa nodded, her hands twisting the edge of her sweater. How? I didn't have an answer yet, but as I sat there, the pieces began to fall into place. If Greg wanted a fight, I'd give him one, but on my terms, not his. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, I got a call from Greg. His number flashed on the screen like a beacon of impending chaos. I took a deep breath and answered. Jake, he said, his voice slurred slightly, as if he'd been drinking. You ready to settle this? Where are you, Greg? I asked, keeping my voice calm. Let's talk. He laughed, a harsh, guttural sound. Talk? That's rich. No, Jake, I don't want to talk. I want you to feel what I feel. I want you to lose everything. You're drunk, I said, trying to de-escalate. Go home, Greg. Sleep it off. Not a chance, he snarled. I'm not going anywhere until you pay for what you've done. He hung up before I could respond, leaving me with a pounding heart and a gnawing sense of dread. I turned to Melissa, who was watching me with wide, worried eyes. He's not letting this go, I said. I need to deal with him. No, she said firmly, stepping in front of me. You're not going after him alone. You don't know what he'll do. I don't have a choice, I replied. If I don't stop him now, he'll keep coming. And next time, it might be worse. Melissa grabbed my arm, her grip tight. Then I'm coming with you. No, I said, shaking my head. You need to stay here. Stay safe. She looked like she wanted to argue, but the determination in my expression must have convinced her. Reluctantly, she let go, her shoulders slumping in defeat. Be careful, she whispered. I didn't have to look far for Greg. He'd made it easy, parking his car just outside the bar he seemed to frequent when things got tough. The place was dimly lit, the neon sign flickering as if it were struggling to stay alive. Inside, I found him slouched over a table in the corner, a half-empty bottle of whiskey in front of him. He didn't notice me at first, too absorbed in his own misery. But when he looked up and saw me, his expression twisted into something dark and unrecognizable. Well, if it isn't the golden boy, he drawled, his words thick with bitterness. Come to gloat? No, I said evenly, stepping closer. I'm here to put an end to this. He laughed, the sound sharp and joyless. End it? You think you can just walk in here and fix everything? You don't get it, Jake. You already ruined everything. You did that all on your own. I shot back, my voice hard. You want to blame me? Fine. But this ends tonight. Greg stood, his movements unsteady but menacing. You're not walking out of here without paying for what you've done. Then try me, I said, my fists clenched, because I'm not running anymore. The dim light of the bar cast long shadows over Greg's face, highlighting the anger etched into his features. He was unsteady on his feet, swaying slightly as he gripped the edge of the table. The bottle of whiskey beside him tilted dangerously, its amber contents sloshing near the rim. Everything about him screamed volatility, like a powder keg moments from ignition. "You think you're better than me?" Greg spat, his voice low but sharp. "Mr. Perfect, Mr. Ill save the day. You don't know a damn thing about what I've been through." "I don't care about your excuses," I replied, keeping my tone steady. "You made your choices. Now you're dealing with the consequences." He laughed bitterly, his head tilting back as if the ceiling held answers. "Consequences? What about yours, Jake? What about your perfect little life? Bet it's not looking so perfect anymore." I clenched my fists at my sides, forcing myself to stay calm. He wanted a reaction, wanted me to lose control, but I wasn't going to give him that satisfaction. "This isn't about me, Greg. It's about you, and the mess you've made of your own life." His eyes narrowed, the smirk fading from his face. "You think you can talk your way out of this?" he said, taking a step closer. "I don't need to talk. I need to make you feel what I feel." I didn't move, didn't flinch. "What exactly is that, Greg? Regret? Guilt? Because I'm not the one who destroyed my marriage." His hands balled into fists, and for a moment, I thought he might swing at me. But instead, he grabbed the whiskey bottle, slamming it onto the table with enough force to make the glasses around it rattle. "You think you're so righteous, don't you? Like you're the only one who's been wronged." "This isn't a competition," I said, my voice hard. "It's not about who's right or wrong. It's about stopping this before you do something you can't take back." Greg's jaw tightened, his chest heaving as he stared me down. "You've already taken everything from me, Jake. My wife, my life. Why should I care about stopping now?" I stepped closer, closing the gap between us until we were just feet apart. "Because if you don't stop, Greg, you're going to lose whatever shred of dignity you have left. Is that what you want? To be the guy everyone remembers for burning his own life to the ground?" For a moment, he didn't respond. The anger in his eyes flickered, replaced by something I couldn't quite place. Shame, maybe, or fear. But then, just as quickly, it was gone, buried beneath the weight of his rage. "You don't get it," he muttered, shaking his head. "You'll never get it." Before I could respond, the bartender intervened. A burly man with a thick beard and a scowl that could stop traffic. He stepped between us, arms crossed. "Take it outside," he said gruffly. "Now, I don't need this kind of drama in my bar." Greg glared at him but didn't argue. He grabbed his jacket and stormed toward the door, the sound of his boots heavy against the worn floorboards. I followed, keeping a safe distance, my pulse pounding in my ears. Outside, the night air hit me like a slap, cold and sharp. The parking lot was nearly empty, the glow of the streetlights casting long shadows on the cracked asphalt. Greg stood near his car, his back to me, one hand gripping the roof as if it were the only thing holding him up. "Greg," I said, my voice steady, "this doesn't have to end badly. Just walk away." He turned to face me, his expression twisted with a mix of anger and despair. "You don't get it, do you?" he said, his voice cracking. "I can't walk away. You and Melissa, you've already taken everything from me. What's left?" "You took it from yourself," I said, stepping closer. "And blaming me isn't going to fix it." He let out a bitter laugh, running a hand through his disheveled hair. "Maybe you're right. Maybe I did screw it all up. But that doesn't change how this ends." "What are you talking about?" I asked, my chest tightening. He didn't answer. Instead, he opened his car door and reached inside. For a brief, terrifying moment, I thought he might be grabbing a weapon. My body tensed, ready to react, but when he straightened, all he held was a framed photo. He thrust it toward me, his hands trembling. It was a picture of him and Melissa, taken years ago. They were smiling, carefree, the kind of couple that looked like they had it all. "This is what I lost," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "This is what you'll never understand." I stared at the photo, the weight of his words settling over me. It wasn't about the picture, or even about Melissa. It was about the life Greg had destroyed. The life he couldn't accept was gone. "You can't get it back," I said quietly. "But you can stop making it worse." For a moment, I thought he might listen. His shoulders sagged, and the fight seemed to drain out of him. But then he shook his head, his grip tightening on the photo. "You don't get to tell me what to do," he snapped. "You don't get to decide how this ends." Before I could respond, he hurled the photo to the ground, the glass shattering on impact. Then he climbed into his car, slamming the door shut. The engine roared to life, and with a screech of tires, he was gone. I stood there in the silence, staring at the broken shards of glass scattered across the pavement. The confrontation wasn't over. Not yet. Greg was still out there, and I knew he wasn't done. But for now, the storm had passed, leaving only the wreckage behind. The silence of the night didn't last long. I stood in the parking lot, the faint echo of Greg's car fading into the distance, but I knew this wasn't over. The shattered frame at my feet felt like a metaphor for everything Greg had become. Broken, sharp-edged, and dangerous. My phone buzzed in my pocket, snapping me out of my thoughts. I pulled it out and saw Melissa's name on the screen. "Jake," she said quickly, panic lacing her voice. "Greg just called me again. He said he's coming to your motel." My heart skipped a beat, but I forced myself to stay calm. "Did he say why?" "No," she replied, her breath shaky, but he sounded unhinged. "Jake, please, don't try to handle this alone. Call the police." "I'll deal with it," I said, my voice firm. "Stay safe, Melissa. Lock your doors and don't answer if he shows up." "Jake, I mean it." "I'll be fine," I interrupted, trying to reassure her. "Just stay put." When the call ended, I felt the weight of the decision pressing down on me. I didn't want to involve the police, not yet. Greg was a man spiraling out of control, and I knew that if they showed up, things could escalate in a way none of us could take back. I needed to handle this, to end it my way. Back at the motel, I sat in the darkened room, the faint hum of the air conditioner the only sound. My suitcase was still by the bed, half-packed, but I hadn't touched it since checking in. The waiting was the worst part, each second stretching into eternity as I tried to anticipate Greg's next move. Then, just as I began to doubt he'd actually show, I heard it, the screech of tires in the parking lot. My pulse quickened as I stood and moved to the window, peering through the thin curtain. Greg's car was parked haphazardly near the entrance, his silhouette visible as he stepped out and slammed the door. He was holding something. A bat. Its polished wood glinted faintly in the dim glow of the streetlights. "Here we go," I muttered under my breath, steeling myself. A loud knock rattled the door moments later. "Jake," Greg bellowed, his voice rough and slurred. "Open up." I didn't answer immediately. Instead, I moved to the table and grabbed the chair, holding it like a shield as I approached the door. "What do you want, Greg?" I called out, my voice calm but firm. "To talk?" he snarled. "Man to man." "Put the bat down first," I said. "Then we'll talk." There was a pause, followed by the sound of the bat hitting the ground. I took a deep breath, unlocked the door, and opened it just enough to see him. He looked terrible, disheveled, sweaty, his eyes bloodshot and wild. "Talk," I said, my grip tightening on the chair. "You ruined my life," he spat, stepping closer. "You and Melissa. You couldn't just stay out of it, could you?" "Your life was already falling apart, Greg," I said evenly. "Don't blame me for the choices you made." His hands balled into fists, his jaw tightening. "You think you're better than me? You're not. You're just a coward, hiding behind your perfect little act." "Maybe I am," I said, holding his gaze. "But at least I'm not standing here, swinging a bat at my problems." He froze, his chest heaving as he glared at me. For a moment, I thought he might lunge, might try to take me down in one last act of desperation. But then his shoulders slumped, and the fight seemed to drain out of him. "What am I supposed to do now?" he muttered, his voice barely above a whisper. "Melissa's gone. My life's gone. There's nothing left." I lowered the chair slightly, my stance relaxing just a fraction. "You fix it, Greg. You stop blaming everyone else, and you start owning your mistakes. It's the only way." He let out a bitter laugh, shaking his head. "Fix it? How the hell am I supposed to do that?" "That's not my problem," I said, my tone cold but honest. But if you want any chance at putting the pieces back together, you start by walking away. Right now, Greg stared at me, his face a mix of anger, confusion, and something I couldn't quite place. Finally, he nodded, his movements slow and reluctant. Fine, he said hoarsely. You win. I stepped aside, watching as he picked up the bat and trudged back to his car. The sound of his engine roaring to life echoed through the night, and just like that, he was gone. The next morning, I called Melissa to let her know Greg had left. She sounded relieved but cautious. Do you think he's really done? She asked. I don't know, I admitted. But I think he's finally starting to realize this fight isn't worth it. And Lisa? Melissa asked gently. I sighed, running a hand through my hair. She's on her own. I can't fix what's broken there. Melissa was quiet for a moment, then said, You know, Jake, maybe it's time we stop letting them dictate our lives. Maybe it's time we start rebuilding. Yeah, I said, a faint smile tugging at my lips. Maybe it is. The road ahead was uncertain, filled with more questions than answers. But for the first time in weeks, I felt like I could breathe again. Greg was gone. Lisa was out of my life. And while the wounds they'd left behind would take time to heal, I knew I wasn't alone. Melissa and I had been thrown into the same storm, but together, we'd found a way to weather it. Sometimes, you have to let go of the wreckage to move forward. And as I drove away from the motel that day, the horizon stretching wide and open before me, I realized I was finally ready to do just that.